Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she sorted through the pile of unpaid bills scattered across her kitchen table. The numbers blurred together through her tired eyes, but the reality was crystal clear. She owed more money than she could ever hope to pay back. The medical bills from her daughter Emma's emergency surgery 6 months ago had buried them in debt that seemed impossible to climb out of. Emma sat quietly at the same table, working on her homework. At 12 years old, she had grown wise beyond her years, sensing the weight of worry that pressed down on her mother's shoulders every day. She pretended not to notice when Sarah counted and recounted the small stack of crumpled bills in her wallet, or when her mother stared blankly at the calculator display showing numbers that never seemed to add up right. The apartment they called home was small but clean. Sarah had worked 2 jobs to keep up with rent and basic expenses, but even that wasn't enough anymore. The debt collectors had started calling weeks ago, their voices growing more aggressive with each passing day. First, they called during dinner. Then, early in the morning before Emma left for school. Now they called at all hours, their threats becoming darker and more personal. Mrs. Martinez, you have exactly 48 hours to settle your account, or we will be forced to take alternative measures. The voice on the phone had said that morning. Sarah's hands had trembled as she hung up, not fully understanding what alternative measures might mean, but sensing it wouldn't be anything good. The knock on the door came at exactly 3:15 in the afternoon. Emma had just returned from school, her backpack still slung over her shoulder as she munched on an apple. Sarah opened the door, expecting to see Mrs. Jen from next door, or perhaps the mailman with a package. Instead, she found herself face to face with 2 men in dark suits and a woman with a clipboard who looked like she meant business.
Sarah Martinez?
The woman asked, though her tone suggested she already knew the answer. Yes, that's me. Can I help you? I'm Janet Walsh from Meridian Recovery Services. These are my associates, Mr. Richardson and Mr. Path, Torres. We're here regarding your outstanding debt of $47,832.18. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had never seen that exact figure written down before, and hearing it spoken aloud made her knees feel weak. I'm working on a payment plan. I spoke with someone from your office just yesterday. I'm afraid that's not going to be sufficient, Mrs. Martinez. Our client has authorized us to take immediate action to secure the debt. We have legal documentation that allows us to seize assets of equivalent value. Janet held up an official-looking document with stamps and signatures that Sarah couldn't read from where she stood. Assets? I don't have any assets. This apartment is rented, and my car barely runs. There's nothing here worth taking. Janet's expression didn't change. She looked past Sarah into the apartment, her eyes scanning the modest furniture and second-hand electronics. Then her gaze settled on Emma, who had moved closer to the door to see what was happening. Actually, Mrs. Martinez, under Section 47B of the Enhanced Debt Recovery Act, we are authorized to secure alternative forms of collateral when traditional assets are insufficient. Janet's voice remained steady and professional, as if she were discussing the weather rather than destroying someone's life. Sarah's confusion was evident on her face. I don't understand what that means. It means we're taking the child as security for the debt. She will be held in protective custody until the full amount is paid or suitable arrangements are made. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She actually stumbled backward a step, her hand gripping the doorframe for support. You can't be serious. You can't take my daughter. That's not legal. That's not possible, Mr. Richardson stepped forward, his bulk filling the doorway. I'm afraid it is legal, ma'am. Congress passed the Enhanced Debt Recovery Act 18 months ago. It allows approved collection agencies to secure human collateral in extreme cases of debt default. Your debt qualifies as extreme, and you've been in default for over 90 days. Emma had been listening to the conversation with growing alarm. She pressed herself against her mother's side, her apple forgotten on the floor where it had rolled when her grip loosened in shock. This can't be real, Sarah whispered. You can't just take children. This is America. We don't have debtors' prisons anymore. We're not talking about prison, Mrs. Lester. Martinez, Janet said calmly. Your daughter will be placed in a secure facility where she'll be well cared for. She'll attend school, have proper meals, and receive any medical care she needs. Think of it as a very structured boarding school. Once your debt is satisfied, she'll be returned to you immediately. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what was happening. This had to be some kind of mistake or elaborate scam. People didn't lose their children over medical bills. That wasn't how the world worked. But the documents looked official, and the three people standing in her doorway had the unmistakable air of government authority. How long would she be gone? Sarah asked, hating herself for even considering the possibility, but desperate to understand her options. That depends entirely on you, Mrs. Martinez. Pay the debt and she comes home. It's that simple. Janet checked her watch with the casual efficiency of someone who had done this many times before. We need to collect the child now. You can pack a bag for her. Basic clothes and personal items. Nothing electronic. Nothing valuable. Emma finally found her voice. Mom, what's happening? I don't want to go anywhere. Tell them I can't go. Sarah pulled her daughter close, feeling Emma's small body trembling against her. Baby, I'm going to figure this out. This is just temporary. I'm going to fix this and bring you home as soon as I can. Martinez, we need to move this along. Mr. Torres spoke for the first time, his accent thick, but his English clear. The transport vehicle is waiting downstairs, and we have other stops to make today. Through the window, Sarah could see a black van parked on the street below. It looked like the kind of vehicle that might transport prisoners, with small windows and heavy doors. The sight of it made her stomach churn with nausea. Can I have 5 minutes to pack her things? Sarah asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded when everything inside her was screaming. Of course. Mr. D. Richardson will accompany you to ensure you pack only approved items. Sarah led Emma to her bedroom, the large man following close behind. Emma's room was small but cheerful, decorated with drawings she had made and photos of happier times. Sarah pulled a duffel bag from the closet and began folding clothes with shaking hands. Mom, I'm scared, Emma whispered. I know, baby. I'm scared too. But you're going to be brave, okay? And you're going to remember that I love you more than anything in the world. I'm going to work every single day to bring you home. How long will it take? Sarah had no answer to that question. $47,000 might as well have been $47 million given her current financial situation. But she couldn't let Emma see her despair. I don't know, sweetheart, but I promise you I will never stop trying. And I promise you'll be safe. As she packed Emma's clothes, Sarah's mind was already working frantically. There had to be someone she could call. A lawyer, maybe, or someone from the school district who could explain why this was illegal. There had to be some mistake, some loophole, some way to stop this from happening. Richardson cleared his throat. Time's up, ma'am. Sarah zipped the bag closed and knelt down to Emma's eye level. I love you. Remember that. No matter what happens or how long this takes, remember that you are the most important thing in my life, and I will move heaven and earth to bring you home. Emma hugged her mother tightly, tears streaming down both their faces. I love you too, Mom. The walk to the van felt like a nightmare. Neighbors had begun to peek out their windows and stand in their doorways, drawn by the unusual activity. Sarah held Emma's hand tightly, not caring who saw her cry or what they thought was happening. Janet opened the back door of the van, revealing a clean but institutional-looking interior with bench seats and safety restraints. Emma, this is Mrs. Foster. She'll be riding with you to your new temporary home. A kind-looking woman with graying hair smiled at Emma from inside the van. Hello, dear. I know this is scary, but I'm here to help you through it. Everything is going to be okay. Emma looked back at her mother one last time before climbing into the van. Sarah watched through the small window as Mrs. Foster helped Emma with her seatbelt, speaking quietly to her in soothing tones. The facility is about 2 hours north of here, Janet informed Sarah as she prepared to close the van door. You'll be able to visit once a week for 30 minutes, as long as you're current on your payment plan. We'll be in touch within 48 hours to discuss your options for debt resolution. And then they were gone. Sarah stood alone on the sidewalk, watching the van disappear around the corner, taking her daughter and her entire world with it. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the usual city sounds seemed muted, as if the universe itself was holding its breath in disbelief at what had just occurred. Sarah walked back up to her apartment in a daze. The kitchen table still held the bills she had been sorting through, but they seemed meaningless now. The numbers that had seemed so overwhelming an hour ago paled in comparison to the emptiness that now filled her home. She sat down at the table and tried to think clearly. There had to be a way to fight this. People didn't just lose their children over debt. This was the 21st century, not some dystopian nightmare. There were laws, protection systems in place to prevent exactly this kind of thing from happening. But as she sat there in the silence of her daughterless home, Sarah began to realize that maybe the world had changed more than she had understood. Maybe the safety net she had always believed existed was more fragile than she had ever imagined. The sun was setting outside her window, and for the first time in Emma's life, Sarah was facing the evening alone. She picked up her phone to call someone, anyone who might be able to help, but realized she didn't even know where to start. As darkness fell over the city, Sarah Martinez began the fight of her life. A fight to bring her daughter home from a system she never knew existed, armed with nothing but a mother's love and a determination that refused to accept defeat. 3 days had passed since Emma was taken, and Sarah felt like she was drowning in a sea of bureaucracy and legal jargon that made no sense. She had barely slept, surviving on coffee and determination as she made phone call after phone call, trying to find someone who could help her understand what had happened and how to fix it. The first lawyer she contacted hung up on her when she explained the situation. "That's not possible," he said. "Children can't be seized for debt. You're either lying or delusional." The second lawyer listened more carefully but ultimately told her the same thing. What she was describing was illegal and couldn't have actually happened. By the third day, Sarah had spoken to 7 different lawyers, 4 legal aid organizations, and 2 civil rights groups. Most of them thought she was making the story up. A few seemed genuinely confused and promised to look into it, but none of them had any immediate answers. "Mrs. Martinez, I've been practicing family law for 23 years, said Linda Garrett, the 8th attorney Sarah spoke with. "I've never heard of anything like what you're describing. Are you absolutely certain these people were legitimate government agents?" "They had official documents," Sarah insisted, though she was beginning to doubt her own memory. "They said it was legal under the Enhanced Debt Recovery Act." "I'm going to research this Enhanced Debt Recovery Act you mentioned. Can you send me copies of any paperwork they left with you?" Sarah realized with growing panic that the debt collectors hadn't left her any copies of their documentation. They had shown her papers, but she hadn't thought to ask for copies in the shock of the moment. How could she have been so stupid? "They didn't leave me anything," she admitted. Linda's silence on the other end of the phone spoke volumes. "Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to be honest with you. What you're describing sounds like either an elaborate scam or, well, there's really no other explanation that makes legal sense. Have you contacted the police?" Sarah had tried calling the police on the first day. The desk sergeant had listened to her story with obvious skepticism and told her that if she believed a crime had been committed, she needed to file a formal report. But when she tried to explain that her daughter had been legally seized by debt collectors, the officer's expression had shifted to something between confusion and pity. "Ma'am, are you saying your daughter was kidnapped?" he had asked. "No. I mean, yes. But it was legal. They had paperwork. Did you sign anything giving them permission to take your child?" "No, but they said they didn't need my permission." The officer had ultimately taken her information and promised someone would look into it. But Sarah could tell he thought she was either lying or having some kind of mental breakdown. She left the police station feeling more isolated than ever. Now, sitting in her empty apartment with Linda Garrett's words echoing in her head, Sarah began to wonder if she was losing her mind. Maybe the stress of the debt and the pressure of trying to provide for Emma had finally broken something inside her. Maybe none of this had actually happened. But Emma's room was still empty. Her bed was still unmade from the morning she was taken. Her homework was still sitting unfinished on the kitchen table. The reality of her daughter's absence was undeniable. Sarah's phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered it anyway, desperate for any kind of contact with the outside world. "Mrs. Martinez, this is David Chen from Channel 7 News. I understand you have a story about your daughter being seized by debt collectors." Sarah's heart leaped. Finally, someone who wasn't dismissing her story outright. "Yes, that's right. How did you hear about this?" "We received a tip from someone who said they witnessed the incident in your neighborhood. I'd like to set up an interview if you're willing." This sounds like exactly the kind of story our viewers need to hear about. For the first time in 3 days, Sarah felt a glimmer of hope. If she could get her story on the news, maybe someone would come forward with information. Maybe someone else had experienced the same thing. Maybe public pressure would force someone to help her get Emma back. They arranged to meet the following morning. Sarah spent the rest of the evening trying to remember every detail of what had happened, writing down names and descriptions and anything else that might be useful. She searched online for any mention of the Enhanced Debt Recovery Act, but found nothing. She looked up Meridian Recovery Services and found a basic website with very little information and no physical address listed. The next morning, David Chen arrived with a cameraman and a producer. They set up in Sarah's living room, and she told her story once again, this time on camera. David asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in helping her find answers. "Have you been able to contact your daughter since she was taken?" he asked. "They said I could visit once a week if I stayed current on a payment plan, but they haven't contacted me about setting up any kind of payment arrangement. I don't even know where she is. And you said they mentioned a facility about 2 hours north of here?" "That's what they told me, but I've called every boarding school, group home and detention center I can find in that area. No one has heard of Emma or knows anything about this program." After the interview, David promised to do some digging on his own. "We'll check with our legal expert and see what we can find about this Enhanced Debt Recovery Act. We'll also reach out to some contacts in law enforcement and see if they've heard of anything like this." The news story aired that evening. Sarah watched herself on television, hoping her words would reach someone who could help. The story was only 3 minutes long, but it felt like the most important 3 minutes of her life. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Sarah's phone began ringing within minutes of the story ending. Most of the calls were from people offering sympathy and support, but a few were from people claiming to have experienced similar situations. "Martinez, my name is Carol Peterson. I saw your story on the news and I had to call you. They took my grandson 6 weeks ago for the exact same reason." Sarah's hand shook as she gripped the phone. "They took your grandson for debt? My daughter died in a car accident last year, and I became responsible for her medical bills and funeral costs. When I couldn't pay, they came for Tyler." "He's only 8 years old. Where did they take him?" "Do you know where the facility is?" "No, they won't tell me anything. They said I can visit him once I start making payments, but the minimum payment they want is more money than I make in a month. I haven't seen him in 6 weeks. Sarah felt sick. If Carol was telling the truth, this wasn't an isolated incident. There were other children being held, other families being destroyed by a system that seemed to operate in complete secrecy. "We have to find them," Sarah said. "We have to find our children and bring them home." "I've tried everything," Carol replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion and defeat. "I've called lawyers, police, Child Protective Services, the FBI. Everyone tells me the same thing. What I'm describing is impossible and can't have happened." Over the next few hours, Sarah received similar calls from 4 other people, parents and grandparents who claimed their children had been taken by debt collection agencies under the same mysterious Enhanced Debt Recovery Act. All of them had been told their children were being held in secure facilities. None of them knew where those facilities were located. The next morning, David Chen called with an update. "Mrs. Martinez, I've got some interesting news. Our legal expert couldn't find any record of an Enhanced Debt Recovery Act being passed by Congress. But we did some digging into Meridian Recovery Services." "What did you find?" "The company was incorporated just 18 months ago, right around the time you said this law was supposedly passed. But here's the interesting part. They're not registered as a debt collection agency with the state, and they don't have the proper licensing to operate as one." Sarah felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that she wasn't crazy and that what had happened to her was indeed illegal. Terror because it meant her daughter had been kidnapped by criminals, and she had no idea where they had taken her or what they were doing to her. "So what happens now?" she asked. "Well, we're preparing a follow-up story with this new information. And I've been in touch with a detective who specializes in this kind of case. Her name is Detective Maria Santos, and she wants to meet with you." Detective Santos arrived at Sarah's apartment that afternoon. She was a small woman with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor of someone who had seen it all. She listened to Sarah's story without interruption, taking detailed notes and asking specific questions about timing, descriptions, and exact words that were used. "Mrs. Martinez, based on what you're telling me and the information David Chen has provided, I believe your daughter has been kidnapped as part of an elaborate con game. These people are criminals and we're going to find them." For the first time since Emma was taken, Sarah felt like someone in authority was taking her seriously and treating her as a victim rather than as someone who was confused or lying. "How do we find them?" Sarah asked. "We start by following the money trail. You said they claimed you owed $47,000. That debt had to come from somewhere real. Probably the medical bills you mentioned. Someone sold that debt to these criminals, and that's where we'll start looking. Detective Santos spent the next 2 hours going through Sarah's financial records and documentation related to Emma's medical treatment. She made copies of everything and promised to start investigating immediately. "I want you to know that we're going to find your daughter," she said as she prepared to leave. "This kind of operation can't stay hidden forever. They're holding multiple children, which means they need a significant facility and ongoing resources. That leaves a trail, and we're going to follow it." As Sarah watched Detective Santos drive away, she felt the first real hope she had experienced since Emma was taken. Someone finally believed her. Someone was finally going to help her fight back. But as night fell and she sat alone in her empty apartment once again, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. Emma had been gone for 5 days now, and every day that passed felt like an eternity. She had no way of knowing if her daughter was safe, scared, hurt, or worse. Somewhere out there, Emma was waiting for her mother to bring her home, and Sarah was determined not to let her down, no matter what it took. Detective Santos had been working the case for 2 weeks when the breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Sarah was sitting in her kitchen going through medical bills for the 100th time when she heard a soft knock at her door. The sound was so gentle that she almost missed it over the hum of her refrigerator. When she opened the door, she found a young man who couldn't have been more than 16 years old. He was thin and nervous looking, with dark hair that fell across his eyes and clothes that looked like they had seen better days. What caught Sarah's attention immediately were his shoes, expensive hiking boots that seemed out of place with the rest of his worn appearance. "Are you Emma Martinez's mother?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's heart stopped. "Yes." "Do you know where she is? Have you seen her?" The boy looked around nervously as if checking to make sure no one was watching. "Can I come in? It's not safe to talk out here." Sarah stepped aside and the boy entered her apartment quickly, immediately moving away from the windows. His behavior was so strange that Sarah felt a moment of fear, wondering if she had just let a dangerous stranger into her home. "What's your name?" she asked, keeping her distance. "I'm Marcus. I was at the place where they're keeping Emma. I escaped 3 days ago." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. "You escaped? Where is she? Is she okay?" "She's alive, but she's not okay. None of them are okay." Marcus sat down heavily, as if the weight of what he was about to tell her was almost too much to bear. "Mrs. Martinez, the place they're keeping the kids." "It's not what they told you it would be." "What do you mean?" "They said it was like a boarding school." Marcus laughed bitterly. "It's nothing like a school. It's a work camp. They make the kids work 12 hours a day in factories, making clothes, assembling electronics, packing products for shipping. Emma's been assigned to a textile factory. Her hands are cut up from the machines and she's lost weight because they don't give them enough food." Sarah felt the room spinning around her. The image of her 12-year-old daughter working in dangerous conditions, hungry and hurt, made her stomach lurch. "How many children are there?" "When I left, there were about 60 kids, ages 8 to 16. Some have been there for over a year. Their parents think they're in some kind of protective custody." "Where is this place?" Marcus pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. "I drew a map while I was walking here. It's in an abandoned industrial complex about 2.5 hours north of here. Used to be a paper mill, but it's been converted into this compound. High fences, guards, locked buildings. The kids sleep in dormitories with bars on the windows." Sarah took the map with trembling hands, studying the rough sketches and landmarks Marcus had drawn. "Why did you come to me? How did you even find me?" "Emma talks about you all the time. She told everyone your name and where you lived. She never stops believing you're going to come get her." Marcus's voice softened. "The older kids look out for the younger ones as much as we can. Emma's become like a little sister to some of us. When I decided to run, she made me promise to find you and tell you where she is." "What did she say?" "Is she hurt? Is she sick?" "She's scared, but she's tough. Tougher than most of the other little kids. She stands up to the guards when they're being mean to the younger children, even though it gets her in trouble." Marcus managed a small smile. "She's got your spirit, Mrs. Beef Martinez." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. The image of Emma protecting other children in that horrible place filled her with both pride and heartbreak. "How do we get them out? How do we get all of them out?" "That's why I'm here. Tomorrow at high sun. That's what we call noon. They're moving all the kids to a different location." Emma overheard 2 of the guards talking about it. "They're closing down the mill because someone's been asking too many questions. They think the police might be getting close. Sarah's blood ran cold. If the children were moved, they might never be found. All of Detective Santos's work would be for nothing. Do you know where they're moving them? No, but I know how they're doing it. 3 buses will leave the compound at exactly noon tomorrow. They'll take different routes, but they all have to pass through Millfield Junction on Highway 47. It's the only way out of that area unless they want to drive an extra 2 hours around the mountains. Sarah was already reaching for her phone to call Detective Santos.
We have to call the police. They can set up roadblocks, intercept the buses.
Marcus grabbed her arm gently but firmly. Mrs. Martinez, you can't trust the police. At least some of them are involved in this. How do you think these people have been operating for so long without getting caught? How do you think they know when to move the kids right when the investigation is getting close? The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had been counting on Detective Santos, trusting her completely. The idea that the police might be corrupt or compromised made her feel more alone than ever. Then what do we do? I can't just let them take her again. I can't lose her forever. Marcus stood up and moved to the window, carefully peering through the blinds. There might be another way, but it's dangerous and we'd be breaking a lot of laws. I don't care about laws, tell me. At Millfield Junction, there's a place where Highway 47 goes through a narrow pass between 2 hills. If someone blocked the road there, the buses would have to stop. If you had enough people, you could overwhelm the guards and free the children. Sarah's mind raced. How many guards are there on each bus? Usually 2 per bus, plus the driver. But Mrs. Martinez, these aren't just security guards. Some of them are armed, and all of them are dangerous. If you try to stop those buses and you don't have enough people or the element of surprise, someone could get killed. Despite the danger, Sarah felt a spark of hope. For the first time since Emma was taken, she had a real plan, a real chance to get her daughter back. What about the other parents? The families of the other children? Most of them don't know where their kids are. But if you could find them, if you could get them all together, Sarah was already formulating a plan. She had the names and phone numbers of the other parents who had contacted her after the news story. Carol Peterson, whose grandson Tyler was being held, the others who had reached out. If she could convince them to help, if they could work together. Marcus, are you willing to help us? You know the area, you know the schedule. We need someone who's been inside. The boy was quiet for a long moment, staring out the window. If we do this and we get caught, they'll make sure I disappear permanently. But he turned to look at Sarah. Emma asked me to bring you a message. She said to tell you that she loves you and she knows you'll find a way to bring her home. She said you promised her you'd move heaven and earth and she believes you. Sarah felt fresh tears starting. What's your answer? I'm in. But we need to be smart about this. We need a real plan, and we need people we can trust completely. Over the next few hours, Sarah made phone calls to every parent who had contacted her after the news story. The response was immediate and unanimous. Everyone was willing to do whatever it took to get their children back. By midnight, they had a group of 8 adults committed to the rescue attempt. Carol Peterson drove down from the next county, bringing her 2 adult sons with her. Robert Kim, whose 14-year-old daughter had been taken 4 months ago, arrived with his brother and his brother-in-law. The Williams family came together, both parents whose twin boys had been seized just 2 weeks after Emma. They met in Sarah's apartment, crowding around her kitchen table as Marcus drew detailed maps and explained everything he knew about the compound's security, the bus schedule, and the route to Millfield Junction. The guards change shifts at 11:30, Marcus explained. The new guards won't be as alert. That gives us an advantage. How do we stop 3 buses without getting anyone hurt? Asked Tom Williams. We don't stop all 3 at once, Sarah said, the plan becoming clearer in her mind. We stop them one at a time. Marcus, how much distance is there between the buses when they travel? Usually about 10 to 15 minutes. They don't want to look like a convoy. Then we block the road after the first bus passes through, stop the second bus, free those children, and then block it again before the 3rd bus arrives. Sarah looked around the table at the determined faces of the other parents. It's risky, but it could work. They spent the rest of the night planning. Carol's sons had construction experience and access to heavy equipment that could block the road. Robert Kim had served in the military and could help coordinate the timing. The Williams family owned a large van that could transport rescued children. As dawn broke, Sarah felt both terrified and more hopeful than she had since Emma was taken. In a few hours, she would either have her daughter back or she would likely be in jail. But doing nothing wasn't an option. Emma was counting on her to keep her promise. Marcus, who had dozed fitfully in a chair, woke up as the morning light filled the apartment. Mrs. Dean. Martinez, there's something else I need to tell you. Something I heard the guards talking about. Sarah looked at him, sensing bad news in his tone. They're not just planning to move the kids. They're planning to sell some of them. The older ones. The ones who've been giving them trouble. Emma's on that list. The words hit Sarah like ice water. Sell them? Sell them to who? I don't know, but I heard them say that some kids were going to different places where they wouldn't be coming back from. Sarah felt a rage building inside her that was unlike anything she had ever experienced. These people hadn't just stolen her daughter, they were planning to sell her like property. The thought filled her with a fury that burned away her fear and doubt. Then we're not just rescuing them, she said, her voice steady and determined. We're saving their lives. As the group prepared to leave for Millfield Junction, Sarah took one last look around Emma's empty room. In a few hours, if everything went according to plan, Emma would be home. If it didn't go according to plan, Sarah pushed that thought away. Failure wasn't an option. She picked up Emma's favorite stuffed animal, a worn teddy bear named Mr. Buttons, and tucked it into her jacket. Whatever happened at Millfield Junction, she was going to keep her promise to her daughter. She was going to move heaven and earth to bring her home.